The big idea that we've been speaking about is really how we can become one with God and one with his attributes too. We spoke a little bit about this idea that the Sefer Charedim, right, that book that takes the 630 mitzvot and applies each of them to different parts of the body. And so we spoke about this idea of how when we engage one part of our body, we're connecting that part of the body with God himself. I think we also spoke about this big idea of having passion and great intention behind each and every mitzvah, so that also as we connect, say, our hand by giving tzedakah to God, we're also at the same time with that passion and with that intention, we're also connecting our emotions, our sefirot, and maybe even our mind to God, so that more of the body is being connected. And the more in line we are with God by doing these mitzvot and aligning those organs with God, then the more God flows through us and his divine light shines with ours, in oneness with ours. So I think that was the big idea. Let's continue here. Page 137 at the top of the page, as you mentioned, Margot. And the very light of God, that line?
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right, so who wants to read?
I'll read, Rabbi.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you.
And the very light of God envelops and clothes it from head to foot. As it is written, God is my rock, I take refuge in him. In turn, the soul is encased in an envelope of divinity. Hence, we have a bilateral relationship between the soul and the Torah. The soul enters into and unites with the Torah, clothing its every limb in a divine command, and the divine light of Torah embraces and envelops the soul on every side like a protective fortress.
Right, so they come as one. Even the Zohar says that there are three pillars that are interconnected, and that's the Jewish people, the Torah, and God. They're almost, they cannot come without the other. That's why, we are promised that the Jewish people will live forever. Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. Because as long as God exists, so too the Jewish people exist, and so will the Torah exist. They're always together. That's the idea also behind the word, that is often mistranslated. There's a word that's quoted in the Torah. When we received the Torah, then God gave us a few titles. One title was the Kingdom of Priests, right? Mamlechet Kohanim, V'goy Kadosh, Holy Nation. There's another title that God gives us, and that's Am Sgula, which means the nation of Sgula, Segula. Now, very often people translate that as the chosen nation. Now, yes, it's true that we call ourselves the chosen nation in other contexts, like the context of it's in the Torah too, but also in the prayer, that God has chosen us among all nations. But not in this context. Am Sgula does not necessarily mean chosen. I think that's a mistranslation if you find translations that do turn this term into the chosen nation. Am Sgula really means the fortunate nation. But the deeper Kabbalistic commentaries speak about the Sagol. If you're familiar with Hebrew vowels, you have the Kamatz, right, that turn the letter into A, and you have the Segol, which turns the letter into E, right? It's a three dot vowel. And the Kabbalistic commentaries explain that what God was telling us when he was telling us that we are the Segol nation, Sgula nation, that we are a nation that is bound up with those two other dots, like the Segol. We take one dot, the Torah takes the other, and God takes the other. Again, it's three elements, the three entities that are forever connected. And this is what the Tanya is saying here, that our purpose, in a way, our general purpose, everyone has their individual purpose, but our general purpose in life is to not just study Torah through the mind, but study Torah through the action, as we've mentioned. And by doing so, then we will bring completion to those 3 dots, to the Segol. Then we will be an Am Sgula, a nation that is bound up fully with the 3 dots, with the Skula, with the Segol.
Rabbi, is there not a 4th dot, the land of Israel?
So it's a good question. There is Am Israel, Torah Israel, Eretz Israel. Some say, but then you can also say that we're speaking about spiritual spheres here, not necessarily the land of Israel is also very materialistic. Or you can say that the land of Israel is God's home. So by connecting to God, if you connect to God in the perfect way, you also are allowed or enter his home. So the land of Israel is part of the dot that represents God. Yeah. It's a good question because the land of Israel is also bound up with us. Yeah, that explains why. I don't know, but when I'm sure it's happened to you, when you visit the land of Israel, there's something that's awakened beyond reason. Again, it refers to that connection. So that's the idea here, that God's light, the very light of God, envelops and clothes us from head to foot. And that's again because it's part and parcel of who we are, that Am Skula. I mean, it's quite amazing because, take Daniel Pearl, for example, millions of other examples. But Daniel Pearl, who 19 years ago, as we all know, was murdered by evil terrorists in Pakistan. It was in February of 2002, I believe. Right? Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, what's amazing is that just before they beheaded him, right? We all know this. He proclaimed to his murderers that I am a Jew, my father is a Jew, my mother is a Jew, and my grandfather Simcha Pearl has a street named after him in the streets of Bnei Brak. Where does that come from? Samuel Friedman, a journalist for the New York Times, that wrote the next day that Daniel Pearl lived as a universalist, but he died as a Jew. Where does that come from? And the only answer really is because, again, when we peel all peels, we find that there's a soul that is bound up with God and bound up with his Torah. And when push comes to shove, it just jumps out.
Yeah. And
there's no other way to explain it. There's no logical way to explain such a thing. And it's happened to, I was reading yesterday, yesterday was the yahrzeit of Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He passed away on Shabbat morning in 1950, on the 10th of Shvat. A year later, that's when the late Lubavitcher Rebbe assumed the role of leadership, not just of the Chabad movement, but I believe of the entire nation, or entire world. He transformed the world. He cared about Jews in Tibet as much as he cared about Jews in Williamsburg, New York. And anyway, yesterday we commemorated his Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson's yahrzeit, who, by the way, was also a man of tremendous leadership and holiness. He suffered terribly, just terribly, by being maybe the only person really to create a whole network of Judaism in communist Russia, to ensure that the flame of Judaism there, in spite of its immense opposition, is never extinguished. Chassidim of his died, were killed because of this, or were sent to Siberia for 20 years. He himself was captured, faced a death sentence, and if not for miracles, he would have been killed by communists, but nothing fazed him. The story is told of when he was in jail. There's many stories. And by the way, he has a whole diary called Likutei Diburim in which he writes these stories. But that someone came, a KGB officer pointed a gun to his face and said, "Hey, Schneerson, you think you can do anything you want here in communist Russia? There's rules to follow." And without any hesitation or shame, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson responded to this KGB officer. He says, "You know the toy that you're holding against my head, that only scares people that have one world and many gods. I have 2 worlds and 1 God. But this toy doesn't scare me.
Wow.
That's the man he was. Now, I was reading yesterday, just in this context, that he is, so eventually he was able to be transferred to Riga, Latvia, and then he escaped the wrath of the Nazis at the very last second and finally came to America. He was crippled because of the torture that he underwent with the Russians, and we won't go into his whole life story, but what I was reading about is that in 1940, maybe 1941, I don't remember the exact date, but he was in Riga and the Nazis were bombing Riga. So all the Jews immediately went to find shelter, and they found this shelter in the basement of a home. Many Jews were gathered there, and right next to them, there was a very loud noise by a bomb that exploded not far away from their shelter, and people and then it was so loud that it shattered the room, and fire began to ensue from nearby, coming closer and closer to them, and everyone started to shout Shema Yisrael, and thinking that they were going to die. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson writes that Shema Yisrael that he heard from those innocent Jews in that shelter in Riga during World War II gave him a renewed appreciation and a whole renewed connection to Jews, appreciating them and their soul for who they were deeply inside, for what the essence was. When you're exposed to a Shema Yisrael like this, when you hear its cry, then you look at Jews differently. He says his Avas Yisrael, that's what he wrote, his love for Jews took a whole different level, a whole different perspective after that Shema Yisrael. Now, I'm saying this because in a way, this is exactly what Tanya is referring to also, that there is a soul that is forever bound with God and the Torah. It might not always show it, but it's there. And our duty in a way is to peel those peels to shine first and foremost our soul, but also to see it in others. Since we mentioned the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I'll mention just a quick other story that also I was reading yesterday about Chaim Cohen. Chaim Cohen was a Supreme Court judge in Israel. He was known to be very anti-religious. And he came from an Orthodox home in Germany. And after the war, he left everything. And not only leave everything, he was very angry at God. We really can't hold people like that accountable and whatsoever. But he turned his anger towards anyone who represented Judaism, including the religious people. And he fought them in all sorts of ways, but also in legal ways in Israel. Being a judge, he could issue some laws, etc., etc. In any case, he was known to be a hater. In 1977, he found himself in New York, and someone told him, "Hey, come with me. It's Simchas Torah tonight. We're going to dance with the Torah with the Lubavitcher Rebbe." Fine, he went. When people saw him walking into the Rebbe's synagogue in 770, people were saying, "Let's kick him out. We don't want him here." He was known, and he fought against the Rebbe himself too on the law of return, Miu Yehudi, whatever, one of the laws that tried to put it into words, into legal words, who's allowed to return to Israel, who should be considered a Jew and who not. But so he walks into the synagogue, and the Rebbe sees him and says, "How dare you try and stop a Jew, rob a Jew?" Those are the words he used. Rob a Jew from his own heritage. Let him in. They let him in, and then the Rebbe called him, and the Rebbe spoke to him for about an hour. An hour. They were speaking with all the noise, all the commotion. And then the Rebbe said, "Give him a Torah." So the nearest Torah next to him was a very heavy Torah. And this was an elderly man already. I don't know if they did it on purpose, just to give him a heavy Torah or not. But he held the Torah that was very heavy. And someone said, "It's a heavy Torah, it's a heavy Torah." And the Rebbe said that, and the Rebbe proclaimed something so beautiful and profound, that no Torah is heavy for a Jew. Now, Chaim Cohen danced with this Torah, not for 5 minutes, not for 45 minutes. 45 minutes he danced with the Torah with tremendous intensity. The next day didn't change. The next month he didn't change. But in 2002, when he died, that same year that Daniel Pearl died, 2002, people were stunned. Why? Because he had asked to have a halachic funeral. Chaim Cohen wanted a halachic funeral. Very few knew it was because of the Rebbe with this vision right here that we're reading about, that he ignited his soul. So it didn't create a 180 degrees change, but it ignited something to the point that even Chaim Cohen wanted a halachic funeral. A Jew like that wanting a halachic doesn't make sense. But again, it goes beyond reason. Because beyond reason, there's this Sgula, this connection, every soul to the Torah and to the divine. Anyhow.
Well, if I could make a commentary,
please,
that you may not appreciate.
That's what it's about. That's all right.
There are many who have said that Rabbi Akiva's prayer, Shema Yisrael, before he died, which was used in the Middle Ages by Jewish communities as martyrs to say that prayer, and during the Holocaust as well. Some have said, I've read that many are very opposed to saying that prayer, because instead of saying the prayer, they should stand up and fight and not say the prayer and go like lambs to the slaughter. Instead, they should have not pray that prayer and stand up and fight instead. So I just want to throw that commentary out.
No, I mean, look, yeah.
Where did that come from? What was the source of that?
There's many sources. Many have, especially I would say the secular or the Zionist fighters. That was their argument.
Right. Well, look, I don't know if we had the opportunity, I mean, to stand up and fight. I don't know. I mean, what, being in a bomb shelter, can you stand up and fight? I mean, you had the Mordechai and the Leviches, right, of the world, the Warsaw Ghetto. Their fight wasn't successful at the end of the day. So I don't know if we can actually judge and say, well, these people need to fight or not. But all right, thank God, today we're in a better position. We have the state of Israel where we can somehow master our own destiny. And we, Baruch Hashem, can stand up and fight. Yeah. I think it was, I mean, not, yeah. I mean, I think it was a debate that what you're pointing out, and I'm thank you for mentioning what you mentioned, because indeed it relates, I think, to an internal debate among Jewish leaders throughout generations. You had the Rabbi Akivas, like, who supported Bar Kokhba against the Romans, who said, yes, let's stand up and fight. And you had the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who said, no, let's study Torah, let's go to Yavne, and not ignite any fights. And you saw that with the Maccabees. You saw that, you know, in so many other instances. Again, the Warsaw Ghetto is another example, but many other examples. Sometimes I think you could. I don't know if we are in a position to judge also. But sometimes maybe you could. Sometimes you couldn't. Sometimes all you had is that Shema Yisrael. Yeah. Good point. All right. Any other comments, ideas? No. Okay, so if not, let's continue here, 137. So speaking about this oneness with God when we study the Torah, as it is also written, middle of the page. Anyone?
I'll continue.
Please, Jordan, thank you.
Okay. And it is also written, as a shield your will does encircle him, to say the blessed's will and wisdom, which are clothed in his Torah, and its commandments encircles him. The Torah originates in the divine will, and the divine will, which is the inner essence of Torah, surrounds the person and envelops him on all sides as a shield. The Torah, then, is the divine will and wisdom, the divine will being its higher source, following which it clothes itself in the divine wisdom, and this remains its quintessential nature at every level of its evolution. So although the Torah is not revealed to us in the full scope of its highest level, whatever is revealed to us is of the divine will itself, and its study and observance constitute the true and ultimate attachment to God, even if the form it has assumed is lowly and physical. Furthermore, it is precisely because the divine wisdom and will is expressed in such mundane and physical terms that man, who inhabits a material reality, can truly relate to and unite with it, thereby uniting with the divine wisdom and will, which is fully present in the Torah's earthly manifestation.
Right, so just the connection with the Torah, even though, as he mentions here, we won't be able to, sometimes we can't understand the full scope of its highest level. Indeed, the Torah has infinite layers, and that's why you can study the same parsha again and again and again and again and never grasp the full scope of it. But just the act of studying Torah, as the Tanya itself says here, creates a shield that encircles a person and clothes him with God himself. And in a way, it's a shield that maybe the trained eye can see. People who study Torah, and again, study means not just in mind, but also in action. They have a light that enwraps them, and they shine. They truly shine. It reminds me of the story in the Gemara, in the Talmud. I don't know if I shared this one, but it's a story about this man who didn't have good intentions at all. Quite the opposite. He had very, very bad intentions because he fell in love with this married woman, and he said to himself, okay, I'm gonna seduce her. But he came up with a very, very evil plan. Also, he realized that this woman was very poor, so he went to her and he said, can I loan you some money? And I'll loan you for 30 days. After 30 days you can repay me, and if not, then I can request from you anything I want. Fine. He lent her money, and after 30 days, she didn't have the money to pay back. So he went to her home with the intention of, again, doing what he wants. And he knocks on the door, and he says, where's my money? She said, I don't have it. And at the very last second, he stops himself. He says to her, you know what? You don't have to pay me back. He turns around and walks out. Walking out, goes to the marketplace. And this, I think it was Abaye, one of the Talmudic rabbis, see him and say, you must have done a special mitzvah today. Says, well, how do you know? He says, because there's ner daluk al roshcha. There's a candle that's lit up on your head. There must be something special you did today. And indeed, that mitzvah, that self-control, created a light that only the trained eye can see. He had a candle on top of his head. And in a way, when we study Torah, again, in the most practical manner also, not just intellectually, but also practically, and light is created. Some people can see it, some people can't see it. I believe that many, spiritual beings can see it, no doubt. We spoke about the Lubavitcher, he could see things. Abba Steinsaltz, I know, could see things that maybe most people can't see, but maybe because they themselves have experienced it. But it creates this light that also serves as a shield. That's why this expression is a shield. Your will does encircle it. There's a whole discussion in the Talmud, in the Tractate of Sotah, whether this shield protects you only when you are studying Torah, or even when you are not studying Torah, whether it remains with you. If we're talking about just the intellectual study of the Torah, so does that shield protect you only while you're studying or not? Expression is magna umatzlik. Does it protect and save you only while you're studying or also afterwards?
So the question is, what is the you does it protect you?
It
Is that
protect
the
us.
physical you? Is that your soul? What is the you?
The entire being, everything here, everything that you see, the entire being protects us, but our entire being. And the conclusion just of the Talmud is that it protects you even after, even once you close your book and you walk out in the street like that guy in the marketplace. It protects us all the time. Now, we learn that from Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our forefather, that he studied Torah in the house of Lavan. That's what the Talmud says. And afterwards, he closed his, he had to voyage to Israel. But he had Esav along the way that wanted to kill him. But it was the study of the Torah, all that he did, not just the intellectual study, but also the practical study of the Torah, that protected him from the wrath of his brother Esav, who wanted to kill him. Even as he was journeying, he wasn't studying Torah then. But again, that protected him. So it protects you during and after also. It creates a level of protection.
Rabbi, I'm feeling that what we're talking about here is we've grown up, we've gone to school, we've done all these things, we've done our life things and whatever. But when we're talking about the soul, the way we are, and learning from you, we're building an awareness that's a slow building awareness. And maybe it's slow because of me, but some people might be faster. But it's an awareness that once you have it, it just keeps broadening and broadening. And we keep learning more and more and understanding more and more. And so that's why I come to this class every week.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And it's not slow at all.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, but that awareness, that's the word that I use, because once you're aware of it, it's there.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. And it's there. And I think it also shines through. So
could be there when you're not aware of it also.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Very good. But so just this idea, I mean, it's important to remember that, again, the Torah protects us. It's a shield for us. It creates this light. So just to mention, but you know, the Talmud says about the mitzvah of tefillin, again, which is a mitzvah, a different way of studying Torah, actualizing the words that we study. But it says that when the nations of the world will see you with those tefillin on, they will be afraid. And v'yag'u mimeka, they will be afraid of you. Because that in of itself creates, again, this energy that makes people afraid. That's why, by the way, speaking again of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, before the 1967 war, that's when he started his tefillin campaign, because he wanted to ensure that that light shines through all the way to the enemies, and that they are afraid of us, and they want to attack us. By the way, he also predicted, I read it just a few months before the war, that we have nothing to be afraid of. You know, Rabbi Goren, the chief rabbi of Israel, there's a letter between the Rebbe and Rabbi Goren, who was the chief rabbi, and he asked the Rebbe, well, what do you think? Is there going to be a war? Is there not going to be a war? I have to know. Why? Because I have to know whether to prepare 25,000 graves. That's how many deaths we're expecting, 25,000. Where should we put them in Israel? And the Rebbe wrote to him, this is 4 or 5 months before the war. He wrote to him, you have nothing to be worried about. You don't need to prepare those 25,000 graves. We're going to have a victory that's going to last very quickly. A war that's going to be very quick, and it's going to be very fast victory. So he had this again. You know, some people have those trained eyes, but he wanted people again to do this mitzvah of tefillin, because on a spiritual level, again, this shield can radiate and in a way permeate even the enemy, the yaga'u mimeka, so that they are scared of you. So again, it's just another example of a mitzvah that creates this shield.